I'm recording our video. Are y'all good recording?
You can clap, Julia. Yeah.
All right. Well, hello and welcome to episode 6. Is it 6 now of the I'm Thinking of Watching Things podcast? This week we're thinking of watching The Trial of the Chicago 7, Netflix / Aaron Sorkin's newest. But before we get into that, we have a guest today, Julia Gibson, brilliant legal thinker and film person extraordinaire. She can do it all. To start us off, I want to ask you guys, what's your favorite courtroom drama or your favorite Aaron Sorkin project? You can pick either or. Brooke, let's start with you.
Oh, okay.
Putting you on the spot.
Yeah. Wasn't prepared. Just like the trial. Okay. Let's see. Okay. I just Googled courtroom dramas, and then one that really stuck out to me was Aaron Brockovich, which I have no other ties to it except that I remember my mom really liking this movie, and it's one that'll like just be constantly on like every channel on the TV. If you're just like looking for something to watch, it's just always there for you. So I remember watching it, no idea what it's about, except I think like contaminated water. And there's like a sex scene, and I started watching it when I was like 8 or something, and those are the two moments that really stick out to me. So I guess I'll say that. And I watched Molly's Game like in a hotel room once. And I only saw like the first half of it, but that was good. And I'll just throw in there that I read 12 Angry Men for an English class in high school. And I remember reading it. So that is it. That's me. I thought I would have more time to prepare. But yeah, those are my favorite courtroom things that I remember viewing.
There you go. Aaron Brockovich, is that what it was?
Yeah, I think it's Julia
It's a Soderbergh
Roberts
movie, right?
Yeah,
Julia Roberts. She's like looking like Julia Roberts, curly hair.
I think she won the Oscar for that, didn't she?
I have no idea. She
think
did
she
in my
might have.
mind, at least.
Yeah.
My dad's not a movie person at all, but I have like a vivid memory of like coming downstairs when it was like past my bedtime and just to get water or something, and he was like engrossed in that movie. I was like, Dad, what are you watching? He was like, this movie is amazing. Like, he's just, I was like, okay. Still haven't seen it.
It's our parents' favorite courtroom drama.
There you go. Arjun, how about you? What's your favorite courtroom or Sorkin?
Yeah, I don't know if this is like sacrilegious to say this since we're a movie podcast, but my favorite courtroom drama is American Crime Story, The People versus O.J. Simpson, which like I haven't watched any of the American Crime Story series since, but I love that so much, partly because I have somewhat of an obsession with everything surrounding the O.J. trial, just like, you know, capturing the attention of like everybody around the world in 1994 in a way like it seems almost hard to do for that significant of a span of time, like a week of everybody just caring about what this movie star / athlete like might have been doing during this week and just like consuming the entire world in that way. And just the way that like similarly to this movie that we're talking about today, actually, like the actors really just embodied these historical figures, even in a sometimes piece of art that like didn't totally work for me, I think was awesome. And like those performances are always going to stick out in my head. But I'm not the biggest Sorkin fan, but Steve Jobs, I think, might have been a little bit underappreciated this past decade. And I'd like to just give a little shout out to that because Seth Rogen and Michael Fassbender and Kate Winslet, I think, just absolutely murdered that script. And I rewatched that like way more than I expected to after I first watched it like 5 years ago. So a little twofer there for me. I'm Arjun.
There you go. Julia.
Yeah, I can't really think of courtroom dramas. In terms of Sorkin, I'll be basic and say Social Network is my favorite I've seen, but I haven't seen that many. But I watched all of Molly's Game on a plane, so similar to Brooke, not in like the best venue perhaps for appreciating a film. But I remember really enjoying it and thinking Jessica Chastain's great. And it was very engrossing in the way Sorkin kind of gets inside a character's head and you're there with them. So yeah, those two are strong.
Nice. I'm gonna go with the B movie, because this is gonna be the second week in a row this podcast talks about the B movie, and I haven't watched it sober since I was 8, but so I don't quite remember a ton of it, but I do remember that there was some courtroom drama, and I remember Patrick Warburton being there. And that's always important. And I think that I was about to whip out my Patrick Warburton impression. I'm gonna save it. I don't think now's the time.
Can we get the Ray Liotta impression at least? Like we've 2 weeks in a row now of.
I wish I could get a Ray Liotta impression going. But yeah, wow, twice Ray Liotta. We're a new podcast. This is the Ray
I do
Liotta
think
cast.
like we are a new podcast. I think we might need to rebrand because it's like 6 straight weeks now of us doing Netflix movies. I think we might just need to be a Netflix podcast. Although maybe it's just like Netflix is the only distribution now that doesn't like completely have to upend itself. So here we are.
How would we talk about Sofia Coppola next week?
That's a good point. That's a very good point.
We start the rebrand after that.
After that week.
We'll switch to an Apple TV Plus podcast. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, yeah, man. So much content to talk about there.
Yeah, Greyhound. That was a movie.
That was a movie. Boys State, that's Apple TV Plus, right?
Yeah,
I need to see that. I've been waiting to use my Apple TV Plus trial for next week for Sofia Coppola.
I heard Ted Lasso is really good too, but I guess in TV, not really something we care about here on this podcast.
I would review TV. I just watched Haunting of Hill House, and I feel like that is a rich text that could be talked about in many podcasts. Anyways, we are getting sidetracked. The Trial of the Chicago 7, brand new Netflix film from Aaron Sorkin. We're gonna start it out how we always do, which is I guess we don't need to put a spoiler tag because these are events that happened in real life. But just kind of on the surface level, did you like it? Did you not? Did you enjoy your time? How did you guys feel about Trial of the Chicago 7?
I'd say for me, like, it's a nicely shot, well put together movie. I thought all the performances were like all around really strong. For me with this movie, my biggest tension is between like politically what it's trying to do and then like the actual craftsmanship / enjoyment that I got out of it, because I think it's historical inaccuracies and like to the spirit of what that trial was about and what like the 60s were about as a whole. And like obviously it was trying to speak to now, but I don't think it spoke to now in as powerful a way as I wanted it to. But I won't lie, like it was a good 2 hours. I was pretty captivated. I thought it's clever in Sorkin's, rapid fire kind of way. So yeah, that's my surface level take.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I mean, like, I don't think it is quite this bad, but like a few times during watching that movie, the thought, like, is this the Bohemian Rhapsody of political dramas ran through my head a couple times where I'm thinking like, the spirit of what these people are trying to capture, I don't think really thematically matched the themes and the motifs of the movie. But like you're saying, at the same time, like just kind of watching Sacha Baron Cohen and Yahya Abdul-Mateen, like, dive into these roles and give these kind of like magnetic performances that are just going to be totally unforgettable was just so much fun that I had to kind of like push that out of my head at certain parts of it. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, so I had a public school history education, which no offense to Mr. Bronson and Mrs. Stropko, lovely people probably.
Think they're listening?
Name dropping them.
Wow. Name dropping. Yeah, Mrs. Stropko is also my neighbor from back home. So she knows where I live in case I give a bad opinion of this. But I don't think I had ever heard of this or the like Port Huron statement or the Students for like a Democratic Society or whatever. until like I took a history class at William and Mary with another name drop, but this is a beautiful one, to Jerry Watkins, who, yep, I was in class with Julia, but I'm not a history major, but I think I took like 4 or 5 classes with Professor Watkins just because he was amazing. And that was like the first time I had heard of any of this. So this movie for me was like, and because I was not a history major, everything that I kind of learned from that portion of things was just kind of like vague memories of like what these various things were. So I had to do like a lot of Googling throughout this to like, I don't know, I'm not one to really know what the historical inaccuracies were. But given that, I think this movie for me was kind of like, I was just like going along, having a decent time until like I really enjoyed like the last like half hour of this film for some reason. And I don't know, I really liked the ending. It got me. I was like, oh, this is beautiful. And then like the score came up, the sound, and I was like, oh, this is great. So yeah, I had a good time. But yeah, also totally agree with the other things, especially about the like, what is this trying to say in terms of like current political themes and everything, and that it might have like fallen a little short in that aspect.
Yeah, I was nervous coming into this because I mean I think Sorkin writes dialogue super well. That's not a hidden fact. Everybody who's watched one of his movies know it's rapid fire. It's usually really witty and clever, and it's just pleasing to the ear, literally, to listen to. So I figured that it'd be entertaining, and I think it is. It is an entertaining film, and I had a good time with it. But I had to really, about halfway through, I was like, okay, I'm going to let myself enjoy this, because I was really pushing against Sorkin's sort of neoliberal, like, hey guys, as long as we all get along, the good guys will always win. As long as we fight the good fight, this American system always works, which just does not, I think, fit with 2020. Didn't fit with 1968 either. And so I found myself I was pushing against it a lot. And then about halfway through, I was just like, okay, I need to stop watching this as a sort of document of history, because it's not. And instead just like, I don't know, give into this fantasy world where like the good guys, do in a way win, like obviously the trial is thrown out, and we have this like grand ending that Brooke was just talking about, which I'll agree with you, Brooke. I was just like, I let myself enjoy it. Like I'm a cynical person most of the time, and there is easily a world where I watch that and just boo at it. But like just the idea of like the mean cranky old judge being like no, and and like even Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character, which God we'll get to, but he standing up and being like, respect for the fallen, like, you know, like there was like something that I was just like, okay, I'm gonna let myself like feel the warmth of this moment, because 2020 has not let me feel very warm. And so yeah, I go back and forth on my feelings on it. And I think I don't know if I've come to a conclusion on like, I like this, I didn't like this. It's somewhere right in the middle.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And like what you're saying reminds me a lot of like the reactions people had to Green Book, in a sense, where, you know, it was criticized for being too much of like a kumbaya, we can all come together and end racism by like bringing love into the world, and not really like, one, sort of muting and dampening more radical ideas, and two, like oversimplifying maybe the way that we can fix them. And I don't have like a problem necessarily with those stories being told, but when you're co-opting these historical biographical stories that actually happened and don't really match the thematics of your movie, I think it becomes a little bit more problematic. And not to say that I hated this movie as much as I hated Green Book, but I think it is, you know, if you're going to make that the message of your story, like choose different stories to tell, I think would be the problem I have more than anything with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I think it's very much like what we talked a lot about in any of Jerry Watkins's class is like kind of a difference between either like wanting to have like, you know, like radical social change that is very much needed and structural change versus like trying to work within the system. And I think we saw like a little of that placed onto, I guess particularly like Abby Hoffman's character, like at the end there, where he's like, I actually really love the structure of America. There are just like a few bad people, which is like a few bad apples is like a trigger phrase for everything currently. So I think that's like kind of a big issue there, and a good summary of one of the big issues.
That was a breaking point for me when he's like, these American institutions are great, like noted anarcho-communist.
Yeah.
I was just,
I saw that screen cap on Twitter before I watched the movie, so I came in so cynical about, like, ready to just absolutely hate this, which like might be why I'm a little bit like not quite as like, because I don't think most of the movie really matched like some of what happened in the last 20 minutes, where it was really like, oh, like that's how you're gonna write this. But at the same time, like, you know, that is supposed to be like a powerful ending that really, I think, missed the mark in a lot of ways. For me at least.
I still liked it. Maybe I just really liked the music or something. I don't know. I'm one for like a good crowd, a hip hip hooray scene. They do it in Barbie Nutcracker. They do it here.
Hey, now that is a great movie. I don't want to hear anything about that.
No. It gets me every time. I'm a big fan of that.
What is the deal though, like with these historical biopics, which are like, they do this thing where it's like freeze frame and then text comes over at the end? Like, do you guys hate that as much as I do? Because like, what are we doing here? Like,
the ending hurt me. Like, this triumphant music comes up as they're reading the names, and I'm like, okay, but did we in the 70s and 80s and 90s and 2000s and 2010s ever resolve any of this? No, we're still we have come back to the 60s point of like cultural crisis, where we're trying to understand how we've let our system fall apart so badly and do injustice to so many people. And it's just like, but we read the names. We remember them. And then also the text on screen is like, this guy became a stockbroker and stopped being involved. This guy killed him.
Got hit by a car.
I know.
Oh, why is this music so happy?
Well, you guys have like a better historical perspective than I think Caleb and I do, based on what we've talked about so far. So like, I have a question, I guess. Like, wasn't the Nixon era sort of like the end of counterculture in a way? So like, you know, celebrating this as like a sort of triumph seems a little bit counterintuitive to me, when it's like, it's been 40 years and only now are we finally beginning to like maybe reclaim some of the counterculture spirit of the 60s, and like playing it off as like some sort of grand triumph at the end just feels a little bit wrong to me.
Yeah, I mean, the way historians view it is kind of like the 70s and then the 80s with Reagan especially, we have a backlash of conservatism, right? We have all this radical change in the 60s, all this momentum, and then people get freaked out after a couple of big changes happen, and we go back. I think Thomas Hayden, you know, Eddie Redmayne's character has a quote like, something about like the spirit of the 60s fading into the common sense of the 70s, and then 80s is conservative backlash. So yeah, it's kind of weird to have it as a triumph when the actual lasting impact of the 60s, while important, didn't fix the issues we have today. Like, that was a weird like dissonance to me the whole time, of like, this is like, yeah, I'm like, no.
Yeah, I think it just gets back to what Caleb said about like just allowing the fantasy of like this one moment. I guess, yeah, I mean, the only like triumph that I could see it is like, I guess like a triumph over that like specific judge or whatever, and not like maintaining the like decorum and like political, I don't know, like correctness of a courtroom or whatever. But still, like, we end, it's a weird thing like happened with the sound there at the end too. Like, we have the score that I'm such a fan of, and then it like pauses for the text on the screen, and then it like comes back a little bit, and then it isolates like just the sound of the gavel there. So I don't know what that what was happening there, but I thought that was like an interesting turn. But yeah, and then they like go back. I rewatched that last scene right after I finished it, because I was like, oh, I need to go back and see that again. But yeah, then they end again with like the very last thing that's like actually part of the sound of the film is like the chanting or whatever, like of the whole world is watching, which it actually reminded me of another thing that Professor Watkins, man, I'm gonna have to send him this because I'm really just really hyping him up here, made us watch the like Act Up documentary for AIDS in you know, the 80s and stuff, and it kind of had a similar vibe of that, except I feel like that documentary was way more powerful and impactful for like, because it was also a documentary and not actors playing the people that were like vital to these like cultural political movements and stuff. But yeah, using that like crowd chanting thing, it's a weird turn there. So
speaking of performances, I feel like that's almost the best way to talk about this movie, is diving into some of these performances and people and the characters behind them. And I want to ask you guys about Frank Langella. He's Italian. The judge. He's the plays the judge. Langella. I think his performance was great. And guys, was he just the most punchable like asshole
Oh my God.
that you've ever seen on screen? I think one of the positives in terms of how Sorkin deals with like the system, I thought was like using the judge, if you use him as a metaphor for what the system is and represents, and how he can rule over anybody and overrule over anybody and can stomp on anybody and will be unfair to people based on what he wants and what he likes. And there was a part of me that while watching it, like, his performance is great and just the worst person of all time. And that is one place where for a while there, I was like, okay, Sorkin's actually showing us that this is a sham trial and there are political trials, and that it's not that like it's not that this like one judge is necessarily just the worst and most evil person and that's why this trial is going poorly. It's that like, no, literally this whole court system can be manipulated, and it is a little broken. What did you guys think of his performance? And did you also read the judge as sort of a metaphor for all of the courts, or do you think Sorkin was sort of just being like, look at this one guy? Like,
well, I don't know. I mean, I think if he is making that argument of like he represents systemic change, I would say like maybe not, especially with the like Abby Hoffman thing already presented, where it was kind of trying to say that the systems in place are good and it's the bad people there. And if we like read into the like text on screen or whatever, where it like specifically wants to mention that like 78% of the other judges already in the Chicago whatever system ruled him as like an unqualified person, that like very much is an argument for like, this one dude is not only like bad, but he's also incompetent. And it was also like a function of his age, which to me also is implying like not just like the geriatric psychiatry like comment or whatever, not just a function of his age and that like his systems and faculties are failing, but also that with him dying out is going to be like a dying out of a generation that would be shitty in this instance, which I think is definitely not true. So I don't know if I'm buying that.
That's a good point. No, that's a really good point. I forgot about that title card. That's just like that literally is Sorkin being like, this one, if only they had a fair judge, they would have, things could have been different.
I also think Schultz is Levitt's character. Like, he is portrayed as like he's conflicted about doing it, right? It's a struggle. And so I think it's like he is part of the system that is like slightly resisting going with the injustice of the system. Not enough to not do it, of course, but enough to feel a little guilty about it. And so I feel like if he was truly like trying to undermine the system as a whole, but that character wouldn't be as sympathetic and makes the judge a better scapegoat. He also, like, the whole scene where Bobby Seale is restrained and gagged, he kind of whitewashed that a little bit, because he did that for 3 days to Bobby Seale in the actual historical events, and they also had him in chains, I think. So it's just like, that kind of gets wrapped up in like a couple minutes after it happens, and it's still super disturbing. But I was sort of surprised once I read that Sorkin didn't go as far with it as it actually did, because that, if he wants to paint the judge as this evil, sadistic person, go for it, you know?
3 days, Jesus Christ.
I think I agree with what both of you guys are saying. I mean, I think like Sorkin, I'm not sure I love the way especially those two characters were written, Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Langella's character. But I agree with you, Caleb, though. Like, that performance by Langella, I'd never seen him in anything before, and I think he's mostly a stage actor from what I understand, and I think that really plays into this, where he's in the same room, like in the same spot the entire time, but still is able to be like so physically commanding, and just every time, even when he's not physically on screen, his presence is like so felt, I felt like. And man, like, he plays that evil so well. I don't know if that's like his typecast or anything, because like I think he did play Dracula on stage once, so I mean, it's not really the same thing, but maybe like kind of in the same vein. But I agree with what all you guys are saying. That's really astute. Yeah.
Can we talk about Joseph Gordon-Levitt's performance as Mitt Romney, I guess? Like, as this, okay, first of all, he's a fake prosecutor, so he's not the real prosecutor, right, Julia? Am I right on that? Like Joseph, he's not like, he's like a fake version of the real prosecutor.
Like, is it like an amalgam?
Yeah, like an amalgam.
Okay.
I think he was an actual guy.
Oh, really?
My impression was that, so it's like Schultz, and then the like AG deputy guy that's like at the table behind him, I think is like Ferran or something. It looked like I read some of the transcripts of the stuff because I was really curious about it, and it looks like they were much more of a tag team. Like, that guy was way more involved with doing the prosecuting, and it looks like he made him much more sympathetic, Schultz, than he actually was.
Yeah.
Okay. Regardless of whether or not he's real or not, this, like, the scene that we get at the beginning sets you up to think that Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character is going to have some sort of big arc, or will be like some crucial part. And I guess he is that like tipping point at the end when it's like, okay, like, even the prosecutor respects the dead in Vietnam. Like, even Joseph Gordon-Levitt hasn't acted in much recently, right? He's been he's been off the map, and I think he puts in a decent performance here, but the character just pisses me off, and I don't think he's supposed to. I think that, like, my conservative parents are supposed to watch him and be like, that's me, like, versus Trump. Like, I feel that, like, he's just doing his job. He's a good, hardworking man who, like, knows this is unfair, but he has to, you know, do what he's told, and that's a good trait to have, I guess. It does ring as just such like a slap in the face to any radical thought or any, like, it's he's like a good guy. I mean, he's the villain, but he's like the understandable villain.
And to your point, like, it's questionable even more so when you consider, I could be wrong about this, but I believe his last like major role was in the Oliver Stone Edward Snowden movie, which is also like a very, like, you know, muted version of a radical story where he plays like a similar type of character, where I think like it's pushed in exactly just toward the center a little bit, and it's a little bit weird. I don't know. I completely agree with what you're saying. Like, his character bothered the hell out of me.
I think it's weird. We kind of, like, he's the first character, like, that scene is so early on that we have a ton of investment with, like, just him and just a character moment that's not part of the, like, welcome to the 60s montage, which I did enjoy. And because, like, if this is inherently supposed to be a radical story about people who want great social change, why do you start with the person in the system who is vaguely discontent with it? Like, why don't we start more solidly with Hayden or with Hoffman, or not Hoffman, like at any of them, like but not him.
Yeah, it's so weird, like all of his like in that early scene, like everything that he's doing to like kind of subtly try to say like, I don't want this case or whatever, this should not be happening. It doesn't even seem like it's about his, like personal opinions or political opinions or anything, but like how he thinks that it will be viewed by like the American population at large. So just like so much about just like the appearances and not at all about like what is actually happening. And we get just that so weird scene where it shows like his daughters
Yeah.
in what is supposed to be like
Yeah.
a humanizing moment. We're like, oh my God, he even lets them eat like peanuts on the street. Mom doesn't let him do that. Look at him. And it's so weird. And like, I guess we could relate to, oh my gosh, what's the one character that's not Sacha Baron Cohen? The other guy.
Jeremy Strong's character.
Reuben?
Yeah,
Reuben.
yeah. We're supposed to like, maybe there's a moment where we relate to him where he's like, I don't think you're a good guy because you're doing this, but like the film is so much more cueing us to be on the Hoffman train where we're like, I see
Right.
you as a family man and I know you're just doing your best. So
yeah, and like the two audience sort of surrogates to your point are Sacha Baron Cohen and Joseph Gordon-Levitt, where like we spend the most time around them. Both of them have like the biggest arcs, I feel like, and then to have them sort of have a more sympathetic moment in the middle of the film where they're like, I understand you. It just, that was such a weird scene. Like that's the most like sort of bad Sorkin I could feel like kind of came out in this, where it's like him indulging in just like the worst of his sort of tendencies. Yeah, that's a really good point bringing that up, Brooke. I was very frustrated by that scene.
I think it's a part of like Sorkin just loves to show us jagged edges and then round them out, and that's like his resolving of dramatic tension. And I think that, I mean, that goes for both the left and the right. He's like, he won't show anything as explicitly good or explicitly evil. He doesn't take a stand other than like what is like good and fair. And so like the fact that this prosecutor stands at the end is good because like he has a heart for those, who have passed in Vietnam. But he also paints him as fair. He's this prosecutor who's just doing his job. And that the same is applied to like Hayden and the rest of the Chicago 7, which is like they might have these radical ideas, but they're just going like, that doesn't matter. Their radical ideas don't matter. What matters is that they want what's best for America, and they're being treated unfairly, and that's bad. And like that's the extent, I feel like, of what any message I can eke out of this film.
Yeah. I do think there were some pretty interesting performances in a good way, though. And yeah, I remember hearing somebody say a couple of years ago about American Hustle, which I think is a pretty similar movie in a lot of ways, that like it's a Rorschach test with regards to the performances, where like what you think was the best performance or what was your favorite performance in the movie like says so much about you. And I was just curious for you guys, like what your favorite performances was out of this ensemble. And I think like ensembles like this, where there's so many huge name actors with like big roles, like changing their hair and gaining weight and shit like that, I think it's so interesting to see like what performance people latch onto, because like at least based on what I've seen on Twitter, people like love certain performances, hate certain performances, and I just think it's so fascinating, especially with this movie where I had a lot of mixed feelings. And I mean, we talked a little bit about Eddie Redmayne before. I'm just curious to hear what your guys' thoughts are.
I loved Jeremy Strong doing his best Tommy Chong impression. He's just, hey man, like let's not riot. Like he and his like I had a lot of fun watching that character. And I haven't seen Succession, and I know that he's kind of the opposite in Succession, right? Isn't he like a sad boy?
Yeah.
I thought he
like,
was
rich, entitled prick, basically.
He does play the opposite here. And so I think that's the performance I latched on to, and which did mean when I got that title card at the end that he became a stockbroker. That actually like hit me in the gut. Like it was like the fact that in real life, I'm assuming Sorkin didn't make up that title card. He lost his will to be this progressive or this radical rather, and he joined Wall Street itself. Like that, oh god, that gave me chills in the worst way. Like it hit me hard. But I agree on the Redmayne point. Actually, I don't like, not that I don't like Eddie Redmayne, but him doing this like weird American accent. I feel like normally I don't notice when British actors do American accents, but this one I noticed. It just didn't work for me. He's forever condemned to be the angry soft boy, and I'm not with it personally. Except in Les Mis, he can have Les
Yeah,
Mis.
I'll come out and say it. I do not like Eddie Redmayne. Just put that out there.
I think for me, Sacha Baron Cohen I thought was fantastic. Really embodied Hoffman in a way that was awesome. Also, oh my gosh, Abdul Mateen as Bobby Seale was fantastic. I was sort of disappointed he didn't have like more of a role. His case does get severed from the main case, like that happened in real life. But man, every time he was doing his thing on screen, I was just like, you are fabulous. Like, please keep acting. I want more of you. But yeah, I like Jeremy Strong too. I didn't hate Eddie Redmayne. I don't know. I thought it was fine. Like, that's kind of Tom Hayden. I didn't like the way Tom Hayden's character was portrayed. Like, I thought they kind of white liberalized his kind of pretty socialist activism. So that annoyed me more than Eddie Redmayne's actual embodiment of what that was. The accent was weird, but I didn't think it was bad necessarily. I was just very aware of it because I know what Eddie Redmayne sounds like.
Okay. I like Eddie Redmayne. I don't know. I just want him to like tuck me into bed at night and just
whoa.
like in a non-sexual way, like
PG podcast.
just tuck me into bed, like whisper some things, just like comfort me. Fantastic Beasts, horrible movie. He's a cutie though. Les Mis, he's doing it. I recently rewatched Les Mis after only having seen it once when it like first came out. I don't know why. I was under the impression when it first came out and I went to the theater to see it that it was a comedy. That was incorrect. And I also didn't know that it was a musical, which I'm not the biggest musical fan. So I was too thrown when first watching it to appreciate it. The second time around, though, I was like, oh, yes, I was singing all the songs. And Eddie Redmayne was a huge part of that experience for me. So I'm not going to bash him in this instance. But yeah, I think Sacha Baron Cohen was my favorite. And just, I don't know. I don't know how close this is to the actual trial, but I just love his little talk back like instances and his little stand-up comedian parts, where I thought that was like a really interesting way to convey like whatever, like the other side of the story, where he's like wearing an American flag t-shirt and talking to like a group of college students. I thought that was an interesting, like I liked those parts of the film. So yeah.
Sacha Baron Cohen,
like his character did all sorts of disruptions and was like giving his 2 cents every evening.
Yeah.
I think he does carry the film in a lot of ways. In a loaded cast where there's some amazing performances, he really does stand out. And it does like sort of feel like one of those like going for the Oscar performances, like very purposefully, but which sometimes can turn me off to a performance. But no, I agree. He was pretty electric, and you never really quite knew what his character was going to say or do, but it was always interesting. And I agree. Real quick on Les Mis, there was a period of time between 2012 and 2014-ish, maybe 2015, where if you asked me what my favorite movie was, I would have said Les Miserables. I watched that film maybe like 6 times in the theater. was obsessed with it, absolutely obsessed with it. And listened to the soundtrack all the time. For my music honor society inductions, I played a duet with my girlfriend at the time, which was like Les Mis and all the duets in it, and we would like go back and forth on it.
Incredible.
Okay.
Yeah, that was
Maybe you shouldn't say that out loud, Caleb.
No, this is my
Maybe that should
confession.
be just you memory.
This is my confession. I recently rewatched it as well, like maybe a week or two ago. Still great, and I'm gonna stand on this. I'm gonna stand by this opinion. It was just a beacon of hope to me. All those characters have so much love and hope, and that's something I needed to watch. I hadn't seen the movie in like 6. No, I guess not 6. That doesn't make sense. 4 or 5 years, and it was great to rewatch it. Amazing comfort watch to me. That's my 2 cents on Les Mis. Had to get it off my chest.
Film.
Yeah.
I've never seen like the Les Mis from a couple years ago. I guess the only like Tom Hooper musical adaptation I've seen is the masterpiece Cats. So I'll have to check that out. Like see how Eddie Redmayne. Well, I didn't hate Eddie Redmayne in this movie. I thought he was all right, but I did hate him in The Theory of Everything and The Danish Girl. So like, it's just there's a lot of bad going around in my head. But
you just hate him as a person, just personally.
Yeah, but quick shout out to Mark Rylance, who was my favorite performance in this movie. I thought he was so good, so electric, and also I'm blanking on his name, Kelvin Harrison Jr. I think, who was the star of Waves last year and the star of Loose, who played Fred Hampton, and in very limited time, I think gave a really, really, really good performance. I think he's going to be a star, and yeah, like you said, Caleb, I think there's going to be a lot of Oscars that come out of this movie for better or worse, and it'll be interesting to see how that progresses, because I think there's going to be a lot of takes come February.
That Bobby Seale performance and that Fred Hampton performance really make me want to see a Black Panther film, not by Aaron Sorkin. Dear God, do not give it to Aaron Sorkin. But yeah, those performances were also up there for me. Yahya Abdul Mateen, the second. He is just an electric performer. Loved him in Black Mirror. Loved him in other things that I can't remember right now. Yes.
Watchmen.
Yes. As I guess I won't spoil which character he plays. No spoilers. But he's great in that as well. This really is a performance, and I guess it makes a performance carried film, and I guess that makes sense because it's a Sorkin, so dialogue heavy film. But I did want to ask you guys, how did the riot scenes play for you? The actual protest scenes, because the choice is made in this film. It's obviously called The Trial of the Chicago 7, so it's focused on the trial. But we do get those intercuts, flashbacks of what went down in the actual action of the event. Did those play well for you guys? Did it play not well, I guess?
It played like stuff that I have seen on Twitter of recent protests. I was like, this site is familiar in that scene. I'm trying to think, what are like the longest ones that we get? It's the one where
taking the hill, and then gets on the bridge, I would say.
Oh yes, yeah, that last one. I guess the taking the hill scene was an interesting one because they kind of like try to paint, like they kind of single in on like the woman with the American flag or whatever as kind of like an individual person for us to focus on within this like chaotic riot scene. And then there's like an attempted rape that happens by some frat bros.
I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Very weird.
And these dudes just following them.
Yeah.
They walked a long time between the first time and second time that we saw them.
It feels nitpicky, but I was just like, what are you three doing?
Yeah, they're like frat bros too. Like these frat bros have nothing better to do with their Saturday other than to follow. They're so offended that this American flag is being flown by a girl who doesn't believe in the Vietnam War. I don't know. That definitely did ring like a really like square in a round hole like sort of moment where he wanted to pull out, to just like extract emotional attachment or horror or some, we to put like an emotional personal connection to the horrific action going on around them. And it was like, dude, I'm freaked out by the police officer clubbing the protester. I don't need, like, this just rings weird to like turn attention away from the police, which is what the villain should be in this moment. I don't know. It just felt distracting. I'm with you, Julie. I don't think it's nitpicky to.
Okay, good. Yeah, I thought it was weird. And I like looked up to see if it was based in historical reality. No, which makes, because it doesn't ring true in the slightest. But yeah, I kind of wanted more focus on the police violence, like throughout the whole movie. Like, I actually think the protest scenes, they're showing brutally beaten protesters, which, as Brooke said, feels very familiar to what we've been seeing recently. So that was fine, but I feel like more in the trial, more emphasis should have been, that was fine, terrible, but like accurate. But in the trial itself, I thought more emphasis should be on like, this was a police riot and like, it was the state enacting violence on these protesters and not, and I don't, from the transcripts, like I was trying to figure out how prominent that narrative was by the defense. I think more so than in the movie. It was a lot of like undercover cops giving us little bits of what happened and less of them being like, but your people did this to the peaceful protesters. So,
and Michael Keaton tells us this, that they found that the cops did that, which made me think like, okay, like if you found that the cops caused these riots, why didn't you go and prosecute them, Michael Keaton's character? Like, I don't know the historical relevance behind that. I don't know if they did or there was an attempt, or whether it was just like, those darn police. Like,
yeah, it feels a lot like every couple of weeks these days we get like some intelligence agency coming out and saying like white supremacy is the number 1 cause of violence in this country, and then you just don't hear anything about it for the next couple of weeks until another study comes out from another intelligence group. Yeah, it all feels very poignant, especially considering, you know, most of the sort of national discussion around this has been reemerging this summer, and obviously this movie was made long before that. But like you guys are saying, you know, it feels like with a dull edge.
Yeah, I almost wanted it to end with like, I don't know why, if they would have done this or if it was done already, but like with like just footage of the police protests, like paralleling what we saw earlier in the movie, but it's like 2020 and just end after that. Like,
have you seen
a little less triumphant?
Black Klansman?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. That's a really good point. Yeah.
That movie is so powerful at the end to me because Spike Lee does like exactly what you said, which is like, here's the neo-Nazi rally in Charlottesville, and here's like horrific video footage from that. Like that I have some qualms with how Spike Lee treats police in that movie, but the thing that is so poignant about that is that he's like, you see these issues of the Klan and like crosses burning and everything. That's not over. This is not historical fiction that we're looking back on. And I think Sorkin has elements of that sprinkled here and there, but it's not enough to be relevant to 2020. It's trying to be like, look at this thing that happened in 1968 that was like horrible, but we moved past it, and we like, you know, the long arm of history bends toward justice, or whatever the hell that quote is.
It's so funny to me though, because like the only Sorkin movie that I've seen that really actually feels appropriately prescient, like appropriately dealing with the issues that it's talking about in a modern way, is The Social Network, which is like a boomer talking about the internet. And like somehow, I mean, maybe it really is just Fincher pulling that one together, but I love the script for that movie. And like, for some reason, that just feels way more, you know, in tune with the times than these things that he actually lived through. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but yeah, I mean, just like thinking about that movie versus this, like it doesn't really make sense, except for stylistically that they were written by the same person.
Well, I have done a lot of reading on The Social Network, and apparently there were a lot of just like preachy speeches about like what's right and wrong in terms of how you treat your friends and the internet and stuff like that. And Fincher like would just nip that in the bud and was like, that's not what this is about. Which like it's like, oh man, if we had David Fincher directing the trial of the Chicago Seven, whew, like
Yeah. I feel like a lot of the preachy stuff in The Social Network gets like given to coked out Justin Timberlake, which somehow just like feels kind of, like it makes a little bit of sense. I don't know. Like when he's yelling about like, we're going to live on the internet someday. It's like, yeah, that seems right.
Oh shoot, never mind. I lost what I was going to say.
Yeah. I just wish the history, like, something should be historically relevant because it, like, when you're looking at the present, you should be like, yes, like this happened and it's still happening in different forms and new ways, but it's the same experience, and that's why it resonates. And it clearly is meant to frame that as, this is the past, we are better now, which I just thought was such a weird move to make, particularly like if there was any editing going on like up to this summer, I would be so surprised that they didn't change anything with that tone, and maybe they finished it in like 2019 and then we're just figuring out distribution, which is, whatever. But so weird to me, like, if to look at this and be like, yeah, I'm okay with that message.
And it feels like so much on Netflix is like very niche and like kind of not really as broadly appealing as you would find from the studio system. And this feels like they're most like very Oscar baity, like how can we make this appeal to as many people as possible, which like considering the story that is being told, and like you guys are saying, like considering the political climate right now, it just like doesn't work. But I mean, I bet you it's going to work, and I bet you a lot of people are going to watch this and really enjoy it. So I mean, like, it's going to be an interesting couple of months to see what the reaction is going to be like to this film, because I think it's going to be pretty positive, especially from like Netflix viewers in general.
Yeah, I think if you because it's on Netflix, I think if you first of all knew nothing about this trial and then only see this movie and do no other research outside of it, I think like that's something to remember, like as we're on this podcast, like we all went to William and Mary for one thing, so we are kind of a small subset, but I feel like if William and Mary did anything, or if our professors at least taught us anything, was to, critical thinking and all that stuff. So I think, just like from a very surface level, if you don't think about this movie and if you just stick to the fantasy world, it's great. And the ending's great.
Right.
I mean, okay, I'm just gonna stick by and say I just like the last 3 minutes in no other context.
You're allowed to like a movie, Brooke.
I'm allowed to, but now we've just talked about how shitty it was this entire
You're not
time.
allowed to think I'm thinking of ending things as optimistic, though. That's still wrong.
No, I stick by that. I stick by that claim. But yeah, you're totally right. Like, I think if you literally just like end the movie, close out of Netflix, you're like, this is amazing.
You probably sleep great that night. Yeah.
Well, Brooke, let me give you this quote from Smithsonian Magazine, who is quoting Sorkin,
Okay.
and in defense of you liking the ending. So, quoting Smithsonian Magazine. Sorkin makes no claims of hewing exactly to the true history, explaining that the movie is meant to be a, quote, painting rather than a, quote, photograph, an impressionistic exploration of what really happened. And I agree that is what he thinks this movie is a not an exact, replica of history. It's he's not taking a photograph. He is sort of painting his own politics and opinions, or using those to paint his own picture of that. And so that brings me to like a broader question of any film about history. What is the responsibility of a filmmaker to stick to that history versus how much room does a filmmaker have to play with the details? And I don't know if you guys have any takes on that question, because I think that's been a question since film has existed.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, that's not even a question that's just, inherent to film. It's like, how do
True.
you talk about history as a historian? Or how do you talk about it at all? Because I mean, something generally or whatever, like history is like, written by the winners or whatever, but it's like so much based in like everything, also like our current perspectives and stuff. I remember when we read the Port Huron statement in one of Professor Watkins' classes, like, there were a lot of comments about how it could have been even more radical because it was coming from, intellectual white men, and they left out a significant portion of the population or ideas that we have that might be a little bit different today. And Professor Watkins was like very much adamant about trying to say like, yes, but these were like radical for that time, and obviously it's going to be a little bit different. But yeah, as a film, I mean, as long as the intent, I mean, I think there's like a difference between intentions and like what you want the audience to gain from the film. And I don't think it's like, I would hope that people know that they are going to watch a film and not watching like a lecture about these actual events. But it's unfortunate that, like, for me, if I didn't take a class with Professor Watkins, this would be, and I had like an American rural, like public high school education, this would be my only encounter with the trial of the Chicago 7. And like I just mentioned, I think the majority of people probably wouldn't do further research for that. So
Yeah,
I
that's
think
such
it's
a good
tricky
point.
balance.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, because like, we talked about Green Book earlier, and like things like that in Bohemian Rhapsody that are like so clearly bending the truth. Like for so many people, that's going to be their introduction, and that is going to be how they think of these historical figures. And like, it's just hard to imagine that it does these important people justice. Like I can't imagine like, your whole impression of Freddie Mercury's sexuality being painted by like that.
Mm.
And it's frustrating. I totally agree with you, Brooke. And also, like, real quick, I guess it's a little bit off topic, but the quote that you read from Sorkin, Caleb, I think is like the painting photograph thing. Like, does that feel like he just watched I'm Thinking of Ending Things / maybe listened to our podcast before he made that quote? That feels like it was directly ripped from that movie.
I was thinking the exact same thing. He's like, you have to watch this in whatever mood you're in. That's what the film means.
I like, as someone who loves history and like enjoys historical movies, like I think it's obvious that you have to compress and recontextualize and move things around to make big historical events fit into like a 2-hour package. Like that's fine. I just think sticking true to the spirit of that history, and also being aware that you are the entrance for most people to history that people don't know about, is something like, as a filmmaker, as a storyteller, you have a duty to consider. And so like, if you're whitewashing it, like that should weigh on you, because you know that this is popular culture and this will be, the long lasting impression we have of the Chicago 7. And I think it kind of, it makes me upset because the ways in which the movie didn't ring true, like the whole random almost rape of that girl with the American flag, like that's totally fiction, and it kind of takes some of the steam out of this protest scene. And like, it makes sense because that's not what really happened, and it's not necessarily like true to the spirit of events, which I think pervades the whole movie. So it's just like, I don't know, it's definitely a struggle to portray historical events accurately, and there's no duty to make a documentary with every fictional movie you make. But I think there is a duty to consider the history and like the weight of your duty to portray it in a way that at least is honest.
Apparently, and I haven't fact checked this yet, but apparently, because my roommate told me this, so I didn't fact check him, but apparently when this movie, because this movie's been in development for like a decade and a half or something.
Oh, wow.
Originally Spielberg was going to direct.
Yeah.
Apparently early on, when it was like rumored that Sorkin was going to write this script, in an interview, somebody asked him like, oh, like what drew you, or like what draws you to the 68, trial of the Chicago 7? And he had like no answer and was like, I need to read up on that. I'm not too familiar with what was happening and like what, so it really does ring as someone who just sniffed a good story. and I don't think that's necessarily unethical to do, but it doesn't seem that he did the legwork in terms of like, let me read theory, let me read like what the Black Panthers were about, let me like really steep myself into these guys' ideas. It just, he sort of seemed like he was like, oh, they were like left, they were like liberal, and yeah, they were a little crazy, and well, that's as deep as I'm gonna go into it, which in a way like really is almost like chillingly reflects how well Nixon and Reagan and those wiped, and the FBI and the CIA wiped out like leftist thought and any sort of like rising tide of Marxism in America. In a way, it chillingly reflects that, because Sorkin clearly has no clue necessarily. I mean, I don't know the man personally, but he doesn't really have an interest in engaging with those radical thoughts. So in terms of a historical perspective, I think it is almost unethical to those ideas, but those ideas don't have like a lot of people who are the flag bearer for them, so we don't even have like a fight back,
He just heard that it was in a courtroom and he was like, I'll do it.
I feel like there's a difference between like looking at a photograph and making a painting, and then like looking at a photograph and cropping it and rotating it and doing like 60 filters and then posting it on your Instagram for your followers to admire. And
Dang.
I think that's Sorkin. And I mean, I feel like really good movies based off historical events, like they feel like the painting, like you feel like you're watching something real and you don't really get taken out of the experience. Not for me, at least. And I mean, it's like, you know, if our public education history was better and honest and not in many ways American propaganda, it wouldn't be much of an issue and a burden on the filmmakers to do this, but it is because it is.
Oh yeah, if we could talk about propaganda real quick, the thing with the one issue or whatever with that ending scene and Schultz's character like standing as like respect for the fallen or whatever is just such a weird turn that I don't understand how we can like respect radical thinking as long as it's rooted in American patriotism. You know what I mean? Like as long as it's rooted in the fact that like they love America so much that we want to see it like be better or whatever. It's just such a weird concept to me. So like Schultz in doing that isn't in any way like being radical or like showing sympathy or whatever. He's, you know, kind of showing sympathy for like a time honored thing of like respect for the dead and respect for the fallen or whatever, which is like steeped in American patriotism.
Right. Especially when it like made him the sort of de facto hero of the resolution of the Bobby Seale arc of the story. And it's like, what are they trying to do with that character? I mean, clearly he's trying to be much more sympathetic than any of us took it, which might say a lot more about us than it does about the movie. But at the same time, like, it's frustrating. Like exactly to your point about propaganda, like, man, like it is, I mean, all movies are going to have a perspective, especially historical dramas like this, and even documentaries, but you know, it's clearly not what we wanted to see.
He face-tuned the shit out of that photograph. It's truly sad.
Yeah, that bothered me. That, I think you make a great point, Brooke, about it has to be rooted in American patriotism, because that is like the I think the most egregious line is the Abby Hoffman quote saying like he believes in these institutions, because he just did not. He wrote a book called Steal This Book. Like he did not believe in capitalism at all. And so that did ring offensive. And I think we are meant to, or we as in the general audience, the general Netflix audience, like you were mentioning earlier, Arjun, would find the prosecutor sympathetic. Like, I think it really is like, let's give conservative people someone to latch on to, because, you know, somebody like because this film believes in the rule of law, I think. I mean, I think that this film believes in the institutions. It believes that we just need good men in these institutions. And
A few of them?
A few good men. Oh, nice, Brooke. Yeah, I just there to enjoy this movie, I had to turn my brain off to that, but I don't think that a lot of people necessarily have to, because I think that view is not an uncommon one. I think a lot of people will watch this and be moved by the prosecutor's willingness to not see Bobby Seale being bound and gagged, and that's something that will be valiant to a lot of people rather than obvious.
Yeah, there were just too many subtle mentions of like exceptionalism for this case for it to be like applicable to anything like currently going on. And like I mentioned before, that like they make sure to say time and again that it's this specific judge and to have that end quote thing, but not even like the specific judge, but to have who's the main lawyer man, to have him say, in all my years of being a lawyer, man, this is the one trial where this has ever happened. And he says that like again and again in different creative ways throughout it, that it just like loses any value for this wanting to be any sort of like beacon of systemic change whatsoever. Arjun, did you have to leave?
Oh, no, I'm good.
Okay.
Mark Rylance's character, like Kunstler, the main lawyer, he, like, the trial was even crazier than in the movie. Like, he called in all these like 60s icons into the trial. Like Allen Ginsberg came in and like read poems, and Judy Collins came in and sang folk songs. Just the chaos of it all was even more. And like I feel like to have that would be more in the 60s radical spirit, which is kind of against the spirit of this movie, weirdly. So it's, yeah, it should lean more into those tendencies, and it wants to lean away from them, so that we can have Schultz be this little plug-in for the conservative Oscar viewer who wants to like this but is afraid that it speaks against who they are as a person.
That's really interesting you bring that up, because like every time they were talking about how long the trial had been going on, I felt like it really like had a warped sense of time. And not like it matters too much, but like I didn't really feel like this was something that was happening over the course of multiple months. And I so rarely ever say this, but like I feel like this is honestly something that would have maybe worked better as like a mini series or something like that, where it's like you even like, I mean, you I guess are kind of confirming this, but it feels like there's so much you miss out on, even as a sort of biased historical document. Like, you know, we're 150 days in, like it did not feel like that at all.
No, I mean, that's because they brought in all these witnesses and there was a lot more chaos. And like, I think Mark Rylance's lawyer had like 42 counts of contempt by the end. So there's a lot more back and forth with the judge. There's a lot more funny witnesses and stuff that they just kind of cut out. Like the whole thing with the robes that they're wearing to mock him, like that was true. But there's tons more antics like that. I don't think the police uniforms underneath were true, but the robes were true. So it's yeah, I kind of agree with you that they were like, we're months into this case, the seasons are changing, look, they're going on skating. And it's like we've barely gone over the events of what happened in the trial. Like
one qualm I do have with Sorkin's writing is, and this is something I just wanted to get in before we wrap things up. I think he relies on really canned and easy scriptisms. I don't know what the right term is to make a point that makes me roll my eyes, because we've talked about how clever he is as a dialogue artist, and I think he is, but in terms of like structural things, I'll give a few examples because I don't think I'm being clear with myself. The whole the maid in Mr. LBJ's Attorney General, who is like one of the few Black characters outside of Black Panthers, and all she gets is like, I heard you didn't stand, and he's like, I didn't, it was an accident. And then that's like, and we're supposed to be like, in that moment, be like, wow, he's a disappointment to all Black people. Like, she represents all, like, everybody who, like, who he could offend with. Like, wow. And it's stuff like that is like, it makes me roll my eyes. And there are like plenty of other examples that I could read, but I wanted to get in that criticism before.
It is very surprising that one didn't end up on the cutting room floor. I completely agree. And it's like the one we were talking about earlier, like with Joseph Gordon-Levitt meeting them in the middle of a park, like totally unrealistic, like tonally inconsistent with the rest of the movie, sort of like vignettes. Like, totally feel like the movie would be the same exact thing without, make them worse, if anything.
It feels like a student film thing to do, honestly. And I say that as a student who really struggles writing. I'm not a good writer at all when it comes to screenwriting, I don't think. But I can...
Yes, you are, Kayla.
I'll send you some of my scripts and we'll talk about it.
Okay, then I'll be like, never.
So I don't want to come off as holier than thou, or that, you know, I can critique Oscar winner screenwriter Aaron Sorkin. But I don't know. They're like, it's like things with maybe Julia can give me some good historical perspective on this. But when the whole let the blood be, if blood be spilled, let it be spilled across Chicago, and the whole, all of it is contingent. The entire riots are contingent on him saying, if our blood is spilled. And that's like, everybody's like, whoa, like he didn't mean to, like, blah blah blah. Like, of course he didn't mean to start any violence because he's a good guy. Like, what? Like, I don't know, Julie, if that's actually literally how things went down.
I don't think there was any tape of that line. There was nothing. I also think part of the reason is, like, Hayden was a non-violent person, but he was willing to, like, go up and face police and, like, be beaten back and have their blood spill. And so when they're kind of like, it's crazy, he'd say they go face off against police, he's like, he's not calling, like, to get out guns and shoot at him. He's calling for them to literally be beaten back to show how unjust this is. So yeah, it's very that I felt was very forced too. And they have this whole, like, well, if you go on the stage, you're gonna have to answer to all these questions, and I was like, okay.
The whole grammatical error thing I thought was hilarious, though. Like, I'm not sure if it worked considering the script, but I was cracking up when he was like, that was improper pronoun usage. I figured it out.
That's true.
And, like, saves it. That's so charming when he's like, you always get the, you know.
You've read my work?
Yeah. He's like, you read the report. He's like, I've read everything that you've published. Oh man, really I don't know. I liked that part.
I think it's good drama. Like, I think that
it seems like he has a formula where, you know, it's just like the ultimate example of back and forth, like fast-paced, like wittiness or whatever. And then with the, like, the solution of the hour, he wants you to feel like you have, like, also been let in on, like, a mystery that has been solved, so that there's, like, this moment of gratification, like, also for the audience, where you're like, yes, like, I understand it now.
Yeah, that's so true. And, like, in the same way, I think Molly's Game is, like, a thoroughly enjoyable movie, despite having these same sort of Sorkinisms that don't really work. Like, I think it's much easier to remove the historical context and, like, cultural context around that, and as opposed to in this, where it's kind of impossible. I mean, like, you know, I think I could probably enjoy this movie a lot more if it was completely fictional, but I guess, unfortunately, that's not the way art works. So, sorry, Sorkin.
Well, it seems that it feels like we're wrapping things up here. Before we move on to what we've been watching, did anybody have any last sort of thoughts or jabs at Sorkin, or
well, I haven't thought about
Sorkin?
Your poster. Did you already get a Modern Romance poster like a month after watching it? That seems like a very quick turnaround. I'm impressed. Framed and everything. My wall will slowly get things. I have a painting that I'm commissioning that's gonna go there.
Oh my god!
Wow. Can we get like a little taste? What's the painting of, or do we have to wait?
No. I can let you know. So it's actually going to be a series of paintings. I'm supporting an artist friend of mine who I think her name is Rebecca. I should plug her Instagram because she's an amazing artist.
We can drop it in the notes, the show notes.
We'll be sure to do that. and I wanted to support her as an artist. And I had this idea that like let me take 3 scenes from 3 movies that I love that are related thematically, and have her do her artistic impression of that, because I love her work. And so I'm doing 3 dancing scenes because dancing brings me joy, and I'm clinging to all the joy I can in 2020. And so it's one painting. It's like they're gonna be small paintings, but one of them is in Nights of Cabiria, where the Fellini film, where Cabiria, who is like a prostitute, goes out with her first high-end client, and she's in this swanky club that she's never seen before, and all of the like really rich people are dancing very like slowly and respectfully and like very stiffly, and she's just so overwhelmed with like the riches that she's never been around. She just starts like dancing her ass off and just like going around, and it's like a big moment of joy for me. So I picked that. I picked this like love scene in La Atlante, the French film from the 30s, where like a separated lovers have this like weird quasi-dream water dance where they're like in water and dancing together, and it's like edited with superimpositions, and I think it's gorgeous. So that's one painting. And then the third is a scene from Come and See, which is just the most depressing film of all time. And Brooke knows this, and Julie knows this. But it is the scene where they are in a respite and they dance the Charleston, because that scene is very moving to me, that these kids can find joy in the worst of circumstances. So that's gonna go there. Thank you for asking me about my wall. I do have Modern Romance, because I did love it so much while watching it. I've been going on Albert Brooks binge. Yeah, this is the transition. What have we been watching recently? I watched Broadcast News recently, which is just an amazing rom-com from 1987. James L. Brooks, writer director, starring William Hurt, Holly Hunter, and Albert Brooks. And yeah, just a joy. Just some of the best. Speaking of snappy dialogue, some of the best witty dialogue trends. It's all about how news in the 80s, they felt like it was going towards entertainment instead of real news. So it's kind of depressing. Because they're like,
good thing that didn't happen.
Yeah, thank God. They're like, the state of the news, like what will happen in the future if we let news keep going down this, like, and I'm like watching in 2020, it's like a little depressing, but good movie. Yeah, I also watched Ice Princess, the Disney Channel original film.
Yes.
Good movie.
Because my girlfriend came over last night and I was in the middle of a psych episode, and she was like, no, we're watching this instead. And so we did.
What psych episode?
It was the Twin Peaks one, because
that's a good episode.
I hadn't seen it since I'd seen Twin Peaks. So going back, there's so many references. It's
I guess
crazy.
I haven't either. I better go rewatch that one. That's a really good point. Yeah, because I like that episode even not having seen Twin Peaks like 10 years ago when it first came out. Yeah.
Love Psych.
Good show.
What have y'all been watching?
I guess I can't remember if I brought this up last week or not, because I think I watched it like right before we started recording. But Orson Welles' F for Fake, which I didn't like love it, even though I thought it was really cool when I first watched it. And over the past week, it's just really grown on me, and I've thought a lot about art. And I don't know, like I think it would make like a really interesting, double feature with Gus Van Sant's Psycho, which is basically a shot-for-shot remake of Alfred Hitchcock's movie. And F for Fake deals a lot with, forgery and art forgery and what true art is, and if that even exists, and like legacy and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And I think it would be fascinating, especially like in an era where specifically with movies, like we talk about, there is so much ripping off of like old styles, and even, shot for shot remakes in a lot of ways, and rebranding of old franchises, and, reviving these old ideas. And it's something that has really stuck with me over the past week, even though I didn't expect it to. Orson Welles, pretty smart guy.
Speaking of ripping other pieces of work off, did y'all see the I can't believe I didn't mention this in our discussion on Trial of the Chicago 7. Did you see the Twitter clip that went viral that is line for line from Trial of the Chicago 7 in West Wing?
Oh, yeah.
Like he just
Yeah.
literally took his own dialogue and is like,
Yeah,
we'll just copy paste.
Great joke, by the way.
Yeah. So yeah, that's another. I don't even have a comment on that. That's just like, I guess if I were a super successful writer and wrote one of the most revered TV shows of all time, I'd feel the right to take some of the best lines and just copy paste. Whatever. Give me money anyway, Netflix.
Yeah, honestly, do you think it was intentional, or do you think he was like, this sounds good?
I feel like I heard this somewhere
Is
in
this
the show. I
familiar?
can't remember.
No.
So
This is
close.
all me.
So, it was so close to the exact wording. Like, I was like, did he really just reproduce like his brain set in like 2004 or whatever for this Now movie? Or I couldn't tell. He also wrote it probably way long ago, so I wonder if he had like just written that line and was like, I'll just borrow it like in 2007, and now it's like 2020 and it feels like 10 years ago.
He's like, no one will notice.
I've been watching a lot of sitcoms for a class I'm in. I was watching a lot of Seinfeld, which I had never really watched before and only heard reference to from my parents, and it was pretty funny. So that was fun. I also watched About a Boy recently, with like Hugh Grant and Nicholas Hoult. Would recommend. I thought it was going to be funny, and it was, but it was also very sad in parts. One of those movies that I was like, this isn't going to hit me, and that like immediately hit me, and I'm like, okay.
How old is that?
It's like 2000, early 2000s, 2002 or something.
I love Nicholas Hoult. I didn't even know he was still acting back then. I've got to check that out.
I think it's his first role. He's like a little boy.
That's awesome.
But he's very good in it. He does a good little boy well. And Hugh Grant kind of plays an asshole, which is a good type for him. Like he can do the charmingly befuddled guy well. He can also do like I'm kind of a dick well.
Paddington 2 Hive.
Yes, I think he is kind of a dick, so it's easy for him to get. Yes, fans of Paddington 2, check out About a Boy.
I have been watching only Halloween films. I thought for some reason all of today that Halloween was next Saturday, which in fact it is not. My mind was blown. Time has been warping. But I was like, oh, this is great news. I can watch more Halloween films up until that moment. So yesterday I watched Nightmare Before Christmas for the first time ever, actually. And that kind of animation truly creeps me out to my core. So it was a little hard for me, but I, for some reason, had that like opening This Is Halloween song like memorized for years now, but did not realize that the film itself was a musical. So it was another Les Mis moment for me. didn't go in prepared with the musical mindset, but still enjoyed it. And then I watched Halloween Town. Still good. Might not recommend it if you did not watch it as a child, because it's a little tough to get through with the dialogue at moments, but very much enjoyed it. And also I've been watching exclusively my own video content self-promotion here, where me and another friend from William & Mary, Maria Schwartz, started again a late night comedy show that we write and hopefully produce every Friday, where we just look at the news and then make jokes about it and record ourselves doing so and dress in business attire. So everyone should check that out. It's called The Catch Up.
Is it on YouTube? Because I follow you on Instagram, but it's not
Yeah,
YouTube.
it's on YouTube. Yeah, our production company name, oh yeah, here's a little inside information, is Morton Third Floor. And then we found out that Morton, like apparently most people and buildings at William and Mary, was named after a very racist person. So we might need to do a complete rebrand, but that's okay. We're better early
It's a great
in our
floor,
career.
though.
Well, no one knows us yet. So yeah, that's currently the name of the YouTube channel. That'll probably change very soon. But yeah, all of our episodes are there. But also on Instagram, we have an Instagram account. And also on the YouTube channel is all of our videos that we've made. We did a short series before this that was called The Unofficial Board of Visitors. Making fun of that. I had to actually act in that one. Not a great actor, but I did it. And all of our 24 speed entries were the ones that like won awards or whatever for that. So check those out too if you want.
Good plug. Speaking of plugs, here is let's see, art from the artist. Her name is Rebecca. The Bold Stylo is the Instagram. Let's see. There's a lot of different kinds of art. Like her style is like it's very impressive in the like how much they can do. So that's the Bold
She's friends
Stylo.
with Teddy.
Yes.
Oh, I had a psych class with her.
Very
She
cool.
was too cool for me to talk to. Not that she like gave off like don't talk to me vibes, just that I was intimidated personally. And it was only like an 8-person class, and I was like, better not say anything. Too cool.
Fair. All right. I think we're wrapping things up. This has been the Trial of the Chicago 7. I'm thinking of litigating things.
I like that. Yeah. I'm thinking of writing things. No, that doesn't work as well. No, I like yours. Let's keep it.
The Sorkining things. I don't know.
Sorkining things, I think.
I'm thinking of walking and talking. I don't know.
Have a good week, everyone.